My dad, we've talked about it. We've had him on the show. He played professional baseball. And this week, I was very closely following a Twitter account that belonged to the AAA Montreal Expos AAA club, the Winnipeg Whips. The Winnipeg Whips might have had the worst uniforms in all of baseball history. They pretty much look like hot dog on a stick uniforms. The hats are like red, white, and blue. It was ridiculous, especially like the white uniforms that they wore. They just kind of looked silly. But I follow at Winnipeg Whips on Twitter, and you should check it out because the guy who runs the account at Winnipeg Whips is doing something remarkable and I think pretty neat, and it's pretty good use of Twitter. He's commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Whips being in Winnipeg. He's doing a live diary of the Expos AAA farm team, and it's 1971 right now because that's 50 years ago. So the guy who's running the account puts out all these tweets on a daily basis and is basically tweeting like life is happening in real time. And I was very curious to kind of follow the box scores and follow the developments, especially this week, because it was 50 years ago this week. June the 16th happened, I think that was Wednesday or so, that my dad was traded from the New York Mets organization, the AAA team in Tidewater, the Tidewater Tides. He was traded from the Tides to the Winnipeg Whips. And this trade came as Tidewater was on like a 2-week road trip. And my dad had, on the final game of a homestand or a road trip that they were playing against Winnipeg, my dad is informed at breakfast that he has been traded. He was traded from one dressing room to the other. His old manager in Tidewater, Clyde McCullough, was now the manager for the AAA Expos team, the Winnipeg Whips, and went to have breakfast. And my dad was sent to go meet Clyde for breakfast, and he was going to be informed that he had been traded. And my dad had talked about this for years, and my dad was under the impression that maybe his contract was sold. He wasn't sure about it. He knows Jimmy Williams, who went on to manage the Atlanta Braves. Many people remember Jimmy Williams. Jimmy Williams went from the Expos to the Mets, but my dad wasn't sure because he thought Jimmy quit and then ended up in Tidewater. But long story short, there's no like transaction file back in that day where you could read the transaction and know what the trade was. So I was following this week with great curiosity because I knew we were coming up upon the time of the season 50 years ago where my dad left one dressing room for the other. And sure enough, it happened on Wednesday. The Winnipeg Whips Twitter account tweeted that Tony Canzano left the Tidewater dressing room, walked a few steps north, and entered the Winnipeg clubhouse as the newest Whip. He was traded 2 hours before game time. He started at second base that day, hit a home run to center field to lead off the 6th inning, had 2 or 3 hits in that game as he remembers it. And Dad, who was coming off a broken arm in the 1970 season, the year before, was, essentially traded from the Mets to the Expos. Now, my dad was not happy about this. Be clear. Like, he had been in that Mets organization for 5 or 6 or 7 years, however long he had been in professional baseball, and he viewed it very much as the Mets giving up on him. But I look back, he was 24 years old. He gets traded. He hits 7 home runs after he's traded. I really do think, between you and I, listener, that trade is what sort of was a pivot point in my dad's life as a 24-year-old man. Because he went from being on the road for 2 weeks with the Tidewater Club to Winnipeg then having a 2-week homestand. It meant that he was away from my mom and myself. I was a 1-year-old kid, and my older sister, who was 3. He was away from us for a solid month. The following season, he finished up strong with the Whips. The following year, he went home in the off season, and he determined he wasn't coming back. He held out, and they thought he was holding out for money, and they offered him $500 a month more. He turned it down, and my dad never went back to play another AAA baseball game or another professional baseball game. He tells me that he wasn't running away from baseball, he was running to his family. But I can't help but think as I look back at like my dad and 24 years old. I was 24 years old. I was still in college. I was graduating college. I didn't know what I was doing. Didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. My dad had already had 7 years of professional baseball at age 24. So I want to end today's show by saying to my dad, thank you. Thank you for being the kind of dad that would play catch with the kid in the backyard. Thank you for being the kind of dad that would come home after a long day at work. He commuted like 40 miles each way and bring the newspaper, bring me the sports page. And then he would spend time with me, and he probably didn't feel like it, but he would spend time with me talking about the box scores and talking about what happened that day and the standings and who's pitching tomorrow. And he engaged with me in such a way that, it just fed my passion. I don't think I'd be on this radio show today if my dad had not engaged with me in that way, if he had not humored me in that way. So I want to thank my dad for being that kind of person. And if you're that kind of person out there that engages with your kids, maybe even at the end of a long day, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the investment that you're making with your family and your kids. So yes, happy Father's Day to you. Happy Father's Day to my dad, who didn't run away from baseball. He walked towards his family all those years ago. And you know what? He says no regrets, right? But man, if I had a time machine, I'd get back in it. I'd get to 50 years ago today. I'd find him in Winnipeg and I'd say, listen, I'm from 50 years in the future. I'm hosting a radio show. It's a long story. I'll tell you it later. But here's the thing, Dad. You're going to go off in the off season, get some fresh sunshine, get some clean air, come back, get yourself to Montreal. And, well, maybe it's just fine the way it worked out, right?